Welcome back, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, perhaps even good night, wherever you are at in this point in time, wherever you're located, and whatever the present time is for you as you're listening to this. Glad to have you here with me today. I'm Dr. Gabe Roberts, the subconscious healer, and this is the Subconscious Healer podcast where we will dive into the endeavor of psychosomatic principles, psychosomatic meaning mind and body, something that's kind of a ghost, in the words of John Sarno, a ghost because it's very evasive, very elusive, and the scope and the practices provided by psychosomatic work are not clearly defined, especially by DSM or any of our conventional healthcare, certainly. But psychosomatic means mind body. Just to summarize, psyche meaning soul, soma meaning physical body. And so, one of the things that we want to be exploring is childhood traumas. That's the big, um, I would say, smoking gun responsible for anywhere from 7 to 8 out of every 10 doctor visits is related. If it's something acute like a chainsaw injury or a car accident, perhaps not. But if it's something more along the lines of a chronic symptom, chronic pain, chronic illness of any sort, anything from multiple sclerosis, diabetes type 2, um, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, ALS, any kind of chronic illness you can think of, autoimmune condition, anything you would go see a specialist for, anything from dermatology to a cardiologist, is going to be some way, shape related to psychosomatic in some way, mind, body. Uh, One of the questions that often gets asked is how does childhood trauma, lead to development of chronic illness? Well, several ways. You could have what's called a self-mutilation program installed between the moments of conception to around 5 years old. And I didn't get a breath of this in any of my educational work, and I haven't learned about it from any type of academic related subjects or anything else. I learned mostly from a very few select mentors that have already passed on, and my own work in doing psychosomatic work with patients for the last decade. And that is that uh, the most powerful memories we have are from conception to around 5 years old. And I'll even dare to say something rather bold, but it's very evident when you do this kind of work, and anyone that I train to do similar work to mine finds this to be the case. 75 to 80% of our population are people that don't necessarily love themselves deeply. They may say they do stoically outside. They may do it from a stoic, uh, you know, analytical, conscious mind, perhaps, but a deeper emotional part of them won't agree, not necessarily agree. 75 to 80% of the population does not have self-love, self-acceptance, self-deserving, feel that they're enough in some way, shape, or form, mostly due to events at conception. And I would say those events have to do with if whenever mom find out she's pregnant, perhaps it was an unexpected pregnancy, and is immediately shocked, has regrets, um, is very stressed out about the possibility of bringing a life, another mouth to feed in the house, um, all the things with bringing a child into the house. The mother feels in that moment, and as she feels it, that newly developing baby in the womb absorbs every bit of it. And believe it or not, we learn the most at that moment of conception. We learn a tremendous amount in the womb, and most of our learnings, most of the things we feel about ourselves, who we are, how we view the world, our place in the world, what we deserve in life, um, even as far as health, healing, happiness, and income, are all solidified by the age of 5. So whatever's happening to a child, to an early pregnancy, an infant, newborn infant child, leads to chronic illness because many times they develop certain coping mechanisms and traits that allow them to survive momentarily, but later these become adaptations that um, are wired into their personality that they never even know are there. They're elusive, like landscape, trees in the distance that just are always there, always present. So you assume it's normal, but it's not normal. These traits, and anyone you know that has anything from rheumatoid arthritis to Crohn's disease to ulcerative colitis to chronic pain, autoimmune conditions, if you look at them close enough, you'll see there's certain characteristics that are always there. They don't express certain emotions. It's very difficult for them to express certain emotions. Maybe anger. It's very difficult for them to express how they feel. They can't say no to certain circumstances, even though they really want to say no to situations, to people, to things that are presented within them. But they say they cannot say no. They end up saying yes um, to things that are not serving them, and as a result, they get very stressed out. They get very stressed out internally, but they don't even realize it's taken place because this part of their personality is so wired in, it's so integrated into them and who they are that it's just like landscape. It's like trees, that you just assume are there. You assume it's your normal, and you don't even ever question it. And that constant stress, that conflict within, creates illness over time. These people they cannot express boundaries. Um, they have these simple characteristics. Um they can't say no to certain people because they're afraid if they say no, that person might not like them. So they're they want to be very likable, they want to be very nice, and they will do everything they can to appease people, to appease others, to blend in with the crowd, and to not make waves and to not create any kind of conflict. I'm almost thinking of the Toy Story episode whenever the T-Rex toy, um, and Woody and Buzz were kind of in a confrontation. And I think it was the potato head that said, "Right, Rex?" And he goes, "I don't like confrontations," in that little whiny voice. When you see somebody who, obviously, the T Rex, you can see it in his eyes, has a lot of shame, a lot of low self esteem, but just that glimpse we see of these, Pixar characters in a child's movie gives us a depiction that there was some kind of trauma done, and it's so woven in to our culture that you can have it in characters such as this T-Rex in a child's movie, and nobody even bats an eye, nobody even raises an eyebrow about it. It's just normal, it's just there, just like the trees, just like the landscape. But those traits, those characteristics, like I'm describing right now in the movie Toy Story, are without a doubt um, characteristics that people have of chronic illness. When they work with me, we take them back to the very first seed planting of when they first learned how to cope, when they first learned to, they weren't allowed to express themselves. They weren't allowed to say certain things. They weren't allowed to speak their mind. They weren't allowed to, they didn't feel loved. They didn't feel like they're enough. So as a result, they do everything they can to feel loved, including not upsetting anyone, being super nice. And afterwards, when in follow-up sessions, I can always tell when that old personality is leaving and the new self is starting to emerge, because one of the common questions I ask them is, well, how's it feel? And what I mean by that is they often tell me that suddenly, spontaneously, and to their utter astonishment, they're able to say no to people that they've never been able to say no to. Suddenly they're able to say no to their husband. They're able to say, no, I'm not, that's not going to happen. They're able to express themselves without regard to other people's, needs. What I mean by that is they take care of their own needs, and suddenly that impulsive, compulsive behavior of, I'm responsible for how other people feel and I must not disappoint anyone. When that disappears, suddenly they're speaking their mind a little more. They're holding their boundaries safely, and they are expressing themselves appropriately, because that second nature coping mechanism is dissolving away, and who is coming out as their authentic self, speaking up their boundaries. And whenever they start to tell me that they're suddenly speaking their mind, they're suddenly saying no to the guy who took advantage of them, or the date that stood them up, or the husband that's just usually trying to avoid the interacting with the parents, or the parent that's avoiding interacting with the children. So he tells his wife, "You go deal with it. You go deal with it." And finally, working with me, she says, "No, we need to do this together. You need to get involved." And the husband, puts the newspaper down and looks at her like, "Who are you?" Whenever I hear these kind of stories from my patients, I know healing has taken place. I know that they are connecting with that authentic self. And the second nature, the coping mechanism, is dissolving away. Every time I ask them, how's it feel to say no? How's it feel to be able to say something without, worrying about their needs, worrying about how, if you're going to hurt their feelings at all, being able to say what you need to say so you don't have that conflict, that inner stress. Without a doubt, the words relief, relaxed, very freeing come out of their mouth. So, in other words, when they've had these patterns of compensating, of trying to be super nice, of not saying no when they should say no, of having a deep identity of I'm responsible for how other people feel and I must not disappoint anyone, those are drivers of illness, because no matter what, uh, you're always going to have some kind of internal conflict. If somebody tells you to do something or asks you to do something and you say yes and you really want to say no, deep inside there's conflict going on. And once we resolve that seed planting, that belief, that thought, that memory of where that started, and they suddenly say no, it's astonished by their own ability to say no suddenly, um, a great relief comes with that. And that relief, that satisfaction, that freedom, uh, is the cure, is the cure. Once they start to connect with their authentic self, the stress, the conflict, the deep tension starts to resolve itself, and their own body begins the process of healing. All it knows how to heal, all it knows how to do is heal. And we just got to get out of the way. And many, many times amongst my colleagues, functional medicine, naturopathic doctors are constantly saying the root cause of illness is toxins in our environment, plastics, you know, heavy metals, parasites, bacteria, microbes, Wi-Fi, EMF, and you name it. And not that I disregard any of those, and not that I endorse any of those and say those things are great to have. Um, but it's not those is the root cause. And that misnomer is something that is needs to be met head on. That misunderstanding that these things are the root cause are not the root cause at all, because the people that hold their boundaries, the people that don't have that conflict on the inside, the people that have the personalities of self-preservation, who protect their authentic self, say no when they should say no, protect their boundaries, realize I do my best and my best is plenty good enough, and are the ones that speak their mind, are also the ones that are not vulnerable to these external environmental influences. And I don't know how many times I see on a regular basis people that have went to the just a huge amount of work, changing everything they possibly can in their home, even putting Faraday cages on their house, on their beds, and eliminating every possible microbe they could come in contact with, even putting masking tape over the door jambs to keep external air from coming in. And once we resolve those inner conflicts within themselves, all of that stuff goes away. And the funny thing is, despite doing all those measures, taping up the door to keep external air out, because they have such severe chemical sensitivity, and the nutritionist and the doctors tell them, you got to stop eating this, you got to stop eating that, you got to stop taking this, you got to stop doing that. Yeah, you can't go to that park anymore. None of that is improving the person whatsoever. Nobody ever gets better with allergies by removing the allergen, because the subconscious mind set for self-mutilation will say, oh, I've got more things in the environment, I've got more of this, I got more of that. Same thing with a person who numbs something, uses a cream for something, takes a supplement to remove something. If the subconscious mind is set for self-mutilation, it'll say, no problem. I got another joint. I got a gland here. Here's another organ. I got another, another orifice I can target. I've got more body parts than this person has coverage. And that's why a person will bounce from treatment to doctor to doctor to chiropractor to surgeon, physical therapist, all of these things. And what's going on is a deep internal conflict within them that these doctors don't even ask about. These doctors don't ever ask them, rarely ask them, what are you not saying no to? Is there a part of you that is very stressed out because you don't want to upset your spouse? Is there a part of you that needs to say no when you don't say no? And it's not that just bringing that into the awareness is going to fix it, but at least it's a step in the right direction in the detective work of figuring out what the root cause is versus just changing everything in their external environment, which continues to happen. Well, how does this even originate? Well, every child that comes into the earth has a necessity to be loved, welcomed, and nurtured. And when this is not provided during those crucial moments in the womb, as an infant, as a newborn, then the child's life, they did not get the love that they required. They develop into adults consumed by being liked. And this makes you into a person completely, compulsively driven to have concern for the needs of others while completely disregarding your own. And once we see that change in people in psychosomatic work, as a psychosomatic doctor, they suddenly do care for themselves. They suddenly start to recognize their own needs are important, and they do it instantaneously. I mean, they start to do it right after we change those early perceptions from in the womb or to the first 5 years of life. And what happens when they start to attain to the needs of themselves, that relief, that freedom, that relaxing feeling comes on, and that's their own soul getting connected with them again. That's their authentic self starting to come about, something that's been maybe hidden, elusively buried all this time. And the that's ultimately why the suffering has taken place. And these traits of being very likable that people have are welcome in our society, so that makes them even more elusive. um, they're very likable, very nice, suppressing their own needs. And like I said, it creates this conflict on the internal self. It's a definite sign when a person's like this, when they are very likable, they suppress their own needs, they don't say no when they should. That is a sign. Or you're concerned about how other people think so much that it stresses you out. You always feel like you can't disappoint anyone. These are signs that you are not connected with your true self, your true sense of self. This is a secondary, this is a secondary act. It's not your primary original self. That was who you were when you were in when you were in the womb. You look at any tiny infant baby, they know who they are. They express themselves freely. They'll cry until they get told enough times, you stop that crying or I'll give you something to cry about. And that's when the secondary things start to come in. They're not allowed to feel those feelings. They're not allowed to have those emotions. They get buried, and suddenly, that pressure builds up and builds up and builds up until finally it spills over into symptomology and then eventually pathology. And without this connection with true self in nature, you wouldn't survive. So this connection to our authentic self is a necessity. I want you to think of a doctor. Just think of a normal like surgeon, who's successful. He's got the nice office. He's got the big luxurious house, the nice Cadillac he drives to work. And for all practical purposes, he looks like a normal, functioning, successful citizen, right? Imagine this same doctor who decides to go on safari and he flies to Australia or Africa. But let's say he flies to Australia and he goes there because he wants to you know, just go check out the outback. He wants to see what the Northern Territory's like. He obviously doesn't have a lot of experience, but he's a hunter. He's been a hunter. So he flies to Australia, lands the little plane somewhere, gets in a Jeep, starts driving out in the Northern Territory where, you know, your average tourist wouldn't last 2 hours. And he's driving along and sees a water hole and decides it's a time to fill his canteen up. And he goes out there to fill his water hole. And this massive saltwater crocodile comes out of nowhere, grabs him, takes him underwater, and he's gone. So as you're imagining that take place, that there's a reason that occurred. And that reason completely escapes most people. It's likely escaping you right now of how that would happen. It's because he wasn't connected with his authentic self. He wasn't sensing his gut feelings, or maybe he wasn't ignoring those. Now, contrast that to an Aborigine person who lives in that same area, a tribal person who has never experienced childhood trauma, was welcomed from the moment they were conceived and the mother was pregnant, was a welcoming, celebrating thing in the village. Once they're born in a, you know, in this tribal hunter-gatherer type setting, you know, they're held for the first few years of life. Those newborn babies don't even touch the ground for the first few years of life because they're constantly being held and nurtured and welcomed in the arms of the neighbor, the uncle, the grandparents, the friend, the chief, whoever it is. They're constantly being held and nurtured. And so as a result, there's no lacking of connection to this child. They grow up to be a young adult, a teenager, a young man who's an Aboriginal, you know, member who is deeply connected with that gut feeling. He never separated from his authentic self. He never had that traumatic separation that occurs to everyone in our society. And whoever's listening to this, if you're born in America, you have some degree to this. I can talk to people on a regular basis and they're complete addicts. And they say, my childhood was good. I didn't have any traumas. Yes, they did. Otherwise, there wouldn't be the void internally that you're trying to feel with this addiction to whether it's marijuana or heroin or any other kind of drug of choice, from gambling to pornography. Those are all attempts to fill some void. And so imagine this Aboriginal man in the same scenario where our doctor was, and he sees that same watering hole. He goes to get water out of this watering hole, but something inside of him stops him. He senses something's not right. Something isn't right. And he stops without even having any idea why. He stops and he walks away. He lives. Why did he live? And the good doctor was snatched away by the saltwater croc, because the Aboriginal man, his gut acts as a sensing organ. His heart acts as a sensory organ. If you read my book, you understand how the heart has a sensing sensation, a holographic field that surrounds our bodies and can pick up proprioceptive information. And so that's what this Aboriginal man was able to pick up on, that our good doctor was completely blinded to. And that's why the Aborigine man lived and the doctor perished very quickly. This is just one example of how being connected to our authentic self, being in touch with who we are, okay, is essential for survival. Okay. It's absolutely essential for our awareness of ourself, our wellness, our awareness of who we are, our awareness to our relationships to other people and to ourself, and all of our environmental interactions. So if you feel something happening, something taking place, something, 95% of the population has felt the sensation of being stared at through surveys, yet they really don't even know what it means. They don't even know how to explain it. And your average doctor doesn't have a clue on how to depict that, how to scientifically break it down of what's going on. It's very simple. Your brain produces scalar waves, which are the energy that moves millions of times faster than the speed of light. Anytime you have two electrical currents that are combining perpendicular, they create what are called scalar waves. The scalar waves are basically the force. If you think about a Star Wars analogy, the force that is within everything, within every atom, within every particle of life is scalar wave energy. Well, our brain is a generator of scalar wave energy. And when we think about something, we actually create these waveforms of scalar energy that go out into the quantum field. And whenever we send these waves out, this intention, this thought energy, if you will, it interacts with that proprioceptive torus field that our heart has around us, 8 feet or so in diameter around our body. It interacts with that torus field, and it's like a membrane, and we can suddenly sense something taking place, and our proprioceptive nervous system picks it up. So, if you feel something, do you pay attention to it, or do you just truly ignore it? Most people who ignore it, that's our society overall. Most people ignore these kind of things. They ignore their gut feelings. And I'll just be the first to tell you, it's very dangerous ground to do that. The requirement to be our authentic self is an absolute necessity. It's a necessity for life. It's a necessity for who we are. And it's a necessity for everything that has to do with us living the good life.